Welcome to the Business Growth Masterclass, where business growth is made simple. Listen as we interview real business owners and learn from their wins, their losses, and everything in between. Today's guest is a partner at Wheelhouse Development, which focuses on the development of retail and restaurant properties in West Texas. And he's also a partner in NAI Wheelhouse, which offers first-class leasing services to those retail and restaurant properties nationwide. Without further ado, welcome to the podcast, Mr. Brady Collier.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Man, I have been excited about this one. Steven and I have looked up to you for a long time and really admired how you've led your companies and the people that you have. You know, I think of guys like Kyle Cowan and Joe Magby and Dax Reinitz, that they're just like great salt of the earth men, godly men, and they're also just rock stars at what they do. And we've just admired that for the longest time. And so I wanted to get you in here and hear your story for a long time. And so just thank you for being here.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. You're right. I've got the best people.
You did all right.
Yeah, we want to dig into that too. How did you pull that off? But first, maybe you can tell us just a little bit about your business and for our listeners, kind of how you got into the business.
Sure. I went to Hardin-Simmons undergrad, and then I graduated in 2001. It was .com recession. So I went to tech for grad school, and I was thinking I was going to go into finance. And I was buying houses and flipping them with my dad. And we were buying a house, and a guy said, "Have you ever considered a job in real estate?" And I thought of real estate sales kind of like used car sales. And so I had this condescension in my brain. There's like finance, and then there's real estate sales. And then he told me what the average real estate agent in his office made annually. And I was like, dude, that's a lot more than I was planning on making in
like, I'll do that.
Banking or whatever else. And so I started selling real estate, Cold Banker Commercial. That was 2002. And did that for quite a few years. And it was amazing. And then my wife and I felt called to go to Honduras. And so I quit in 2009 and went and got some missionary training. And then we moved to Honduras, had our fifth kid there, had a great experience. And then the elders of our church called us home. And so that was 2013. And so in 2014, April 1st of 2014, I was in a coffee shop just getting a cup of coffee. And I ran into a guy who had lived across the street from me in college. And so he said, "Hey, you're in real estate, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And when I came back from Honduras, I just started doing brokerage work. And he said, "Hey, I'm developing a shopping center over at such and such place. Can I come by your office and just talk about it?" And so that was around April 1st of 2014. And we've been working together every day since then.
That is awesome. What a cool story. And like the mission work was a curveball I didn't see coming.
Yep.
But
yeah, okay.
That was a curveball that I didn't see coming when it happened as well.
Yeah.
Timing wise, so 2009, that was great financial crisis. That was some exciting times in real estate. And so talk to me a little about the feeling called as you know, a business owner, entrepreneur, and that's who listens to this podcast. There's a lot of discernment that we go through and a lot of, you know, feeling like this business is my baby. Mm-hmm. And, you know, 2009, like you'd been at it for 7, 8 years. Talk to us, like, how do you feel called to walk away from a business that you've built and go to the mission field?
Yeah, that's a good question. A guy at my church had been in Honduras for 20 something years, and he was wanting to start a church camp in Nicaragua. And so he came to me one day, goes, "Hey, I'm thinking about helping start a church camp in Nicaragua. And you're a real estate guy. Do you want to go down there with us and look at a bunch of sites and just give us any advice you have?" Sure. So I booked a flight and went to Nicaragua. We toured a bunch of sites. And for me, I was going into it thinking this is just a, pro bono real estate consulting thing to help out a fellow church member. But when I got down there, I just saw things that just moved me in a way that I had never been moved before. And so I came back and I told my wife, I said, you got to experience this. So we took the whole month of December off that year, which was 2006. And we spent a month in Honduras, and we spent a week with 3 different missionaries, just observing their work and their family life and whatever. And my wife had thought she was going to be a missionary from the time she was little. And so she wasn't hard at all to convince her to go down there and do so. And then we were actually on the plane ride home, and I was still moved, just like I was in the summer whenever I went on the first trip. And so I said, can you see us doing that? And it was one of the most convicting moments of my life. She said, why would we go and do in Honduras what we're not doing here? And I mean, like, man, talk about penetrating. And so went to the elders of our church and said, hey, here's the kind of work that we have in mind. Can we do that at the church? They said, yeah. And so we did that for several years here. But the desire to go and do it, to be a part of the work in Honduras, it just never went away. It just like grew over time, even though we got more and more and more engaged in our church here. That felt so much more weighty and more important than what I was doing. And my career was going great, but that just felt, more important.
That's awesome. I have a similar connection in that, along with Stag Business Coaching, a lot of my time is devoted to an organization called Disciple Trips that organizes mission work.
Okay.
And I spent some time living in Peru before I was married. So some of our listeners know that. But anyway, just the whole idea of living a life that's purposeful in the kingdom. And then that carries over into your business, I know, because whenever you're a leader of people, it's all going to be a kingdom mindset if you are a follower of Christ. And so I'm curious about now when you came back and you get back into things that, was it 2013 that you said?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the process of building the business from there and how maybe some of your experience from Honduras carries over.
Sure. Well, I think before I said how Honduras carried over, I told you I worked for Coldwell Banker, which is Rick Kennett. And so I'm the most fortunate person of all because out of college, I went to work for him, and Rick would walk around. If somebody was still in the office at 6:00, he'd be like, hey, go home, spend time with your family. And he just had the right mentality towards business. He led well, just an amazing person, an amazing leader. So I had that modeled even before I went to Honduras to see what could running a company through the lens of Christianity look like. I just had the best example ever in Rick. And so when I got back, didn't plan on starting a company, didn't plan on having tons of employees. But when Grant and I started working together, we said, Rick had always had like a time of devotional and prayer on Tuesday mornings. And so I just told Grant, I said, hey, I'd really like to do this. And so he said, when would we like to start? And we said, why not this next week? And so from the time there was just 3 of us, we started. And that really was a cultural rock time that we all came together and just set our minds on the things that mattered most to us. And it also affected everything. I mean, it affected our hiring. It affected people who felt comfortable in our company, people who didn't. Helped set our core values, our mission. And so, now to answer your question directly, in Honduras, you really find out what's important because you have people who they don't have flooring in their homes, they don't have windows in their houses, they don't have indoor toilets, but yet you see them, walking past. I'm driving to church and they're walking, and you find just the most joyful, amazing people that are living intentionally and purposeful, and they have nothing, but they've got rich, full lives. And so I would say that being in Honduras and seeing rich, full lives in the absence of what most Americans consider to be the most important thing, it kind of shaped my view of what's most important and trying to keep the most important thing most important all the time. And that's kind of hard whenever you're dealing in commercial real estate. There's millions of dollars to develop this shopping center and this. It's real easy to get your perspective off. So I would say that was kind of an anchoring experience for me those years abroad, which helped me keep the most important thing most important.
That's awesome.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a great answer. And I think a lot of people can take that example and learn from that mindset. If you're just chasing dollars, you really don't have a set path. You've got to have your moral foundation and the things that you value. And as a follower of Jesus, it's pretty laid out for you already.
Yeah. And I think, especially in the U.S., at least a lot of churches, look down or turn their nose up at a lot of business owners and kind of tongue in cheek. That I think seeing that and hearing that modeled well of like, how do you lead with that in the forefront? And it's just how you do everything. It's the Bible study that, leads to conversations that ultimately, advises your core values and who you're hiring and the culture you're building. And you look up 10 years later and it's a special place, and it's not, there's no magic bullet or magic pill. It's just daily relationship building and daily pursuing that intentionally.
Yeah.
There's also, we wrestled with this. I'd love to hear what you think about it, Brady. How out front do you want to be by branding the business as a Christian-owned business? And I know a lot of people do that. We don't shy away from our faith, but at the same time, we're not trying to use it as a marketing strategy, mainly because that to me feels a little slimy. It feels like, using that for our advantage or gain. But then at the same time, I don't want to hide the ball either. And I want to be upfront about what I care about and what drives me and motivates me. Anyway, I'm just curious what your perspective on that is as a Christian business owner.
I 100% agree with the way that you said it. Like if you look on the website and you see our core values, they're going to be what they are, but they're also core values that I think a lot of successful people could embrace, like integrity. And then when you ask, what does integrity mean? We can drill into where do I get my views on integrity? What informs that? And what does that look like lived out? But our public facing, it's neither, as you said, hiding the ball nor overtly using it as marketing. So It's part of who we are, and we're unashamed, unabashed about that. At the same time, we want people to work with us because we're the best in the industry at what we do. And whether or not it's a benefit to them of who we work for and who we represent, we have tons of people who don't agree with us on that we still work with and have great relationships with. And yeah.
So what you do, tell us a little more about that, because I think the listeners want to hear.
Okay. Wheelhouse Development is a commercial real estate development company. And most people don't know what development companies are because they know what a construction company is. They know what a brokerage company is. So a development company, our work is we normally go and get equity investors, people with money that want to invest, and we take their money and we go buy a piece of land. Normally we have a tenant, and you just think of any of the restaurants that or retailers that they want to be in this location. They need to open more locations. And so most of those people are making like 35% return on their dollars invested in their business. So they don't want to own their real estate. They want to lease it from somebody. And that's where we come in. We go and we take equity investors. We buy a piece of land. We go get a loan. We hire an engineer and an architect, and they design a building. A contractor builds the building, and then we fill that thing up with tenants, and we either pay out a return to our investors or we sell that on the market and then give money back to the investors, and whatever's left, that's ours. And so a development company, we bring sites to bear for tenants, commercial, and in our space, particularly, we deal with retail. So we do restaurants and retailers. So that's the work of a commercial real estate developer.
Okay.
Different than a contractor or a broker or whatever.
So is that where you and Grant Gafford started, was development?
That's right.
Okay.
I had a background in brokerage, as I said, with Cole Banker,
right.
And he started a battery company, Battery Joe, and built it up to a lot of locations. And so Wheelhouse Development is kind of where brokerage met retailer, and that's the realm of real estate development.
So is that why you guys chose retail as your?
Yes.
Okay, that makes sense.
Tell me, kind of the first handful of jobs. Is there a story there of getting started?
Yeah, first one. We actually did, our first project was an emergency room in San Angelo, Texas. And we set the record for the highest price anybody had ever paid for a piece of dirt in San Angelo. And,
congratulations.
We didn't come here from Sikkim. I mean, but we went out to investors and they gave us the money. A lender gave us the loan. We hired an attorney, negotiated the lease, and crazy story. Once we got the building built, you turn it over to the tenant and they build out the inside, and the tenant just stopped building. It's our very first project, and we're freaking out. And then the guy wasn't going to be able to open. Well, to our great fortune, thank the Lord, a really, really, really big ER came in and bought them out. And so our cap rate was planned to be here. Cap rate went down, which means price went up, and it worked out great and paid out a 30-something% return to the investors. They were all happy, and they've been with us ever since. And so that was our first project.
Wow. What a nail biter for a first project.
Yeah. It was scary. I mean, it was probably a $3 million project and hadn't done one before. And so we kind of jumped off in the deep end, figured it out.
Yeah.
So sometimes that God math in hindsight is pretty apparent, but in the moment you're sleeping's pretty difficult. Your hands are, head's in your hands and you're struggling through it. Okay.
Now, to be fair, Grant had built a shopping center and put his Battery Joe in it, and he had built several of his own Battery Joes. So it's not that we had no experience in building commercial buildings, and he had one experience in leasing up a retail shopping center. So it wasn't, we went from nothing straight to that. So,
wow.
Okay. So you started with that, with the ER. What was the kind of the journey, the first few, 2, 3, 4 years after that?
So there's a shopping center conference called ICSC and another one called Retail Live. And there's one in Vegas and there's one in Dallas. And so we would go to that conference, and we would literally just go booth to booth to booth and say, do you want to open any new locations in West Texas? And they were like, yeah, we've got one on Slide Road, and we've got one on, 4th and University. We really need one out at Milwaukee and 50th, or whatever the story was. And so we would literally write down everybody who needed locations, and then we would find out several people want to be in this area. And so we'd go find the best piece of dirt, put it under contract, and then call them all back and say, hey, how serious are you about that? And then just start putting the tenants with the deals. And the rest is history.
Okay.
And it was just me and Grant. We were doing all the negotiation on this, all the tenant negotiation. We were doing we were doing everything.
Scrappiness. We need to sit here for a second. So business owners listening, like what you just described it seems so obvious. It seems so like, well, that's easy. That's a simple business plan. But not everyone thinks that way, right? Like, you went to 2 of the biggest conferences in that space. You had the courage to buy a ticket, courage to book the hotel, courage to walk that exhibit hall booth to booth and have a conversation. And I don't know I would call that networking, but there's a lot of intentionality there, and it took a lot of courage to just go and put yourself out there and ask, what problems do you have? What needs do you have? And then to come back and discern that with your partner together and take a leap of faith. And that it's so simple, but it takes courage, and it's not. And I love that.
Yeah. It's simple and strategic, what you were doing there. And a lot of people don't think in that way of, okay, we can put ourselves on this playing field where we will win. We are the boots on the ground in Lubbock, and these guys, if they want a new location, we're the ones that can be the finders for them. Do you feel like the way you run the business are you usually thinking at that level, that strategic level of how you're going to achieve growth or break through whatever challenge you're working on? Is that where you like to be as a business owner?
It's where I like to be today, because thankfully I've got 30 people who are pulling all the levers. They're the ones going to the conferences and building relationships with the tenants. And so now I can zoom up and, do the strategy and what tactics are going to take to get there. And, how are we going to go from where we are to where we want to be? The hard thing in those early days is, you're pulling all of the levers yourself, and you got to be at least decent at pulling all of them and great at a few of them, like on the sales side or whatever it may be. And so that's what I enjoy today. Whenever I was in my 20s, I enjoyed just the pure adrenaline of deal making. You're calling the tenant, and you're this one's rejecting you, but this one says yes. And every time you get a yes, it's a big thrill, and so on and so forth. So that was what was fun for me whenever I was young and brand new. And today, seeing the big picture is really exhilarating for me, and trying to chart the path and execute on it.
So what does your business look like today?
It's the same core business. We just have a group of sales guys who go out and build all those relationships. And we have what is my work within my business, or what does my actual business look like? The business hasn't changed at all. It's just now there's more people doing it, and we do a whole lot more projects and bigger scale projects and bigger geographic area. And so the scale of all of it has changed, but the core business hasn't changed at all. Does that answer your question?
Yes. And I was thinking about our conversation when we started and, bragging about your team. And I was just curious, what do you think has been the best timed hire or position that really elevated the business?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. Grant and I were kind of salesy guys, relationship guys. And we realized we were not great with detail, with execution or whatever. So the very first guy we hired, Dax, who you mentioned earlier, he is like a 10 out of 10 when it comes to detail, execution. Nothing falls through the cracks. And so he was the first guy. We took our personalities, our strengths, and we went to the opposite extreme, and we hired that guy. And now he runs, most of the aspects of the company. And so that was our first hire. And then I guess our second hire was another sales guy who could go out and do the relationship development to let us zoom up a little bit. And so that was Kyle. And so I guess our first two hires, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for those two. So I'd say those were the most impactful two hires.
I love that.
Oh, okay. Those two guys are like some of my, like, I respect them so much. How did you find them? Like, how did that happen?
I knew Dax from church. So I had known him for a while. He was at a transition point and knew what he was really good at. And so I just knew him personally. I was actually doing premarital counseling for maybe another mutual friend. She was Hannah Hunt at the time, Hannah Gill now.
Yeah, yes.
We were at BJ's doing premarital counseling. And I said, man, I really need to hire like a guy who could sell ice to an Eskimo. I just need the best sales guy ever. And Hannah's like, you need to call so-and-so. And so he was selling security systems at the time. And so I called him and I said, hey, this is Brady. I'm a friend of Hannah's. And I was thinking about getting a security system. And I wanted to hear him like sell me his product. And he saw right through it. I mean, he cut through it immediately. And so I said, hey, I want to take you. And so we went to Abuelo's and so that's how I met Kyle.
Okay.
And almost every one of our amazing 10 out of 10 hires was through a personal connection, a referral from somebody who knew us, knew what we were about. And so the alignment that we've got with all of our key people, especially, was because people who knew us recommended people who would align with us.
That I love that. That's a practical nugget in it that our listeners, like when we're talking about building a team, right? It's not, spend $5,000 on Indeed and maybe that sometimes that yields good results, but it's developing these relationships over time. It's doing what you said you're going to do and building this culture and reputation of your business where people know. They know who you are, what you represent, how you do business, and think highly of you, that when you're asking, kind of the devil, the people in your circle of influence, that is incredibly powerful. And it's not something that's super scalable, that it can be done really, really quickly, but over time, being intentional with that, you have a bullpen to call on whenever you need to make a hire, and your odds of getting someone 10 out of 10 are much improved.
Yeah. I mean, if I was going to take away anything from that, it's like the best hire you might find, you might already know them, or somebody might know them, and just getting the word out. I think you're right, Albert. Sometimes we think we need to go through this lengthy Indeed process or posting on all the websites and, rounds and rounds of interviews. And sometimes it's just simple. And yet, is it Dax still with you today and has been a great employee, obviously, and then the other guy you mentioned as well. So, yeah. And then the other point that you made earlier when you were just talking about thinking of your team and the order that you hired in, what really stood out to me for the listeners is if I want to hire somebody for a first hire, an early hire, pick somebody who's got the skills you don't. Or pick somebody who's going to take away a job you don't want anymore, so you can fire yourself from sales or whatever it is and do the thing you enjoy more. So, like you were saying, now you can focus on the strategy because there's people pulling the levers everywhere. So I love that. Yeah.
One of my mentors, Charlie, told me I should go to a coaching program in Canada called Strategic Coach.
Yeah.
And you're familiar?
Yep. I did 1 year, Dan Sullivan. Yeah.
Yeah. And so anyway, he talks about here's your incompetence, here's the things you're competent at, here's the things you're excellent at. In the very middle, your target, your strike zone is your unique ability. And so we've operated under that for 10 years of I want to do what I'm really good at, that I get passion from, and everything I'm not good at, find somebody that's their unique ability and let them run with it. And then both of us can be more fulfilled and more productive.
Okay. What's your unique ability?
My unique ability statement, I don't know if I can quote it.
You don't have to quote it.
Okay. So my unique ability would be to identify unique talent, recruit and inspire them to finding their greatness, like to achieving the greatness that's always been within them. They didn't know about it. They didn't know how to use the greatness within them, finding them, identifying their talent, and inspiring them to achieve their maximum.
So you got a little bit of a coach's heart, sounds like.
A little bit, maybe.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I love Dan Sullivan. Who Not How is one of my favorite books. That's a great book. You described kind of this ecosystem or conglomerate of different, sub companies that now make up Wheelhouse today. Can you give an overview of that and kind of what each of them do?
Sure. So Wheelhouse Development was the first company. And that's still our main company. We hired third-party vendors to do our leasing for us, but we just couldn't get enough focus, enough control. And so started NAI, which is a commercial real estate brokerage company. And in the beginning, it just leased the spaces that Wheelhouse brought to the market and helped us find land and buy the land. And so we just represented ourselves basically and allowed us to take commission on the things we were already doing and give us more control. And then it grew way beyond that. Now we do multiple times more third-party leasing and brokerage services than we do representing ourselves. So there's Wheelhouse Development and then NAI. And then we were building shopping centers with all these other vendors. And we said, hey, we want to get a little bit more control of that process and hold ourselves accountable to timeframes and budgets and have more visibility into it. And so we started a construction company. And then Wheelhouse Development was spitting out these shopping centers. And so the trail of dollars, we just wanted visibility into all the leasing money that's coming in and the expenses going out. So we started a management company that manages our shopping center and now does that third party as well. So it's pretty well vertically integrated. We kind of are soup to nuts now.
Okay. How do you go about starting each of those? Do you go find a rock star in that area? Are you still calling on the local network for that? Or are you going out, you're going to those conferences and talking to people that are great at that, then hiring them? How do you start each of those?
Yeah. I'm going to tell you what I did, and I'm going to tell you it may not be the recommended strategy.
Sure.
Every time we had a need, we'd go out and find a person that we respected, admired, trusted, and said, okay, that's the right person. And even if the process takes longer, we're going to bring in the right person and let them build out Who Not How. We're going to let them build out the company. That was a slow and painful and expensive way to build out new companies, as opposed to going out and getting a rock star. And sometimes I just couldn't find a rock star that was already in the space that wasn't doing it great for himself and recruit him to come into our ecosystem and partner with us. That would have been less expensive because the school of hard knocks, when you start with somebody who's not an industry expert, you just have to pay to get that experience. And so in the long run, I think it's going to go great because now I have amazing alignment with the guys that run all the companies, and they're all partners in the companies. I don't have all of the ownership of these companies. It's split between all of the guys that run them. And so that was the way we did it. We found a person, we let them go figure it out.
Okay. Ownership of each of these people. You don't have to, give away, information you shouldn't. How do you go about that? Was it day one, they've got equity in that business, or is it tiered over time? How do you navigate that?
It's different with every single one of them. On one of them, day one, we said, if you'll start this company with us, then you're going to own X percentage and we'll fund it, but you got to do all the work. One of them, we said, this is going to be the ownership structure, but once you hit this measure of profitability over this period of time, then it flips and you become the majority. And I'm a silent investor at that point. One of them, a guy came and he worked with us for several years, and we learned to trust him and get to know him. And then we said we couldn't afford to lose him. We said, hey, if you want to be a partner, kind of like the attorney and accountant, you work there for a year and then you become a partner. So one of the companies, a guy who had been with us for a couple of years, became a partner. And so every one of the companies is different.
Okay, that to our listeners, I think of like the plumbing company, or whatever service business where you've built something. You've done this for decades, and you've built some excellence, and then you've brought on this apprentice. They become a journeyman. They're ready for their masters. You don't want to lose that person, right? You've spent a decade with them. They're really valuable to your company. And thinking strategically like that of, okay, how can I grow the pie for everybody?
Ron Beatonbow, amazing. He was amazing human being. I was at one of the Kingdom at Work conferences, and I heard him say that he decided early on in his business, he would rather have a small part of a very large pie than 100% of a very small pie. And so whenever he and Rick built the Beatonbow companies, that was their philosophy. So there's been times we've embraced that, but I've got really, really successful friends who they wanted to own 100% of the pie, and they've kept 100%. And if people left, and it's worked out really well for them. That hasn't been my path, but I have friends that's worked out really well for.
I keep noticing Action Coach, Ron Beatonbow, other mentors that you've had, coaches that you've had. How important has that been to your professional growth?
Oh, unspeakably. Like I say, we're all the product of our influences and stand upon the shoulders of others. You talked about earlier diving off into the deep end with that first development. Grant's dad was an entrepreneur and started a battery company. My dad was an entrepreneur, had a dairy. And so we had both seen entrepreneurs, and so we stand on their shoulders because we aren't first generation entrepreneurs. And then early on, Dan Sullivan says, you got to think about your thinking. And so from the time we started the company, we invested an incredible amount of money every year to make sure our thinking is sharp, because if you start thinking wrong, you're going to go in a bad direction. So every year, we recently attended the Stegan Leadership Academy in Dallas. And so there's a whole history. There hasn't been a year of our company's existence where we didn't have mentors and coaches to sharpen our thinking.
I love it. And for all the business owners out there who are thinking, I can figure this out on my own, or I can just, white knuckle my way through this problem. I think you stand as a great example of somebody who is open to growth and learning from other people. And I think that's what it's all about. We all need that community. If we want to get better, we're not going to do it on our own. We need that to sharpen us. So I love it.
That mindset, that growth mindset. I think a lot, especially like, people fresh out of college, they think they need to have the answer to everything. This employer hired them to be the expert day one. And that's just not true.
No.
Like being a growth minded person who, has the humility to admit, like, I don't know, but I want to, I have the want to, I have the work ethic, I have the integrity, I have all of these things. That having that growth mindset is, you don't, in school, like, you've got to have the right answer, right? To get a good grade, you got to have the right answer. In life, you just got to keep going.
Yeah.
You got to keep learning, keep, showing up better every day. And that's just like, our listeners of this podcast are like, they're listening to get better.
Yeah.
They're listening to learn something. And so that's just a mindset that not everyone has, but I want to like encourage people to have that mindset, because it's just a better way to live. And you're going to, you don't have to put your hand on every frying pan. You can learn from other people who've already done that.
Yes, for sure.
And people are amazingly generous. Like
yes.
Grant, before we got in the development business, Grant knew that a guy named Matt Maloof from here was developing. And so he called and he said, hey, could I just take you out for lunch and say, can you just tell me what real estate development's like? And he gave him an hour for lunch, told him the whole process. And then Grant called him for the first 5 years of our company, would call and ask him for advice. And he just super generously gave us advice and helped us out. Were we competing? Maybe in some obscure way, but really, like, people want to help pass on the knowledge and skills that they've acquired through their lives, they want to pass it to the next generation. So I think there's more help out there than you could ever imagine if you're just bold enough to just go and ask for it.
Love it. So Brady, what makes you most excited for the future with your business?
I told you that my unique ability is recognizing greatness in people and helping them actualize that greatness. I've got a bunch of young studs in my company that they're in their 20s or young 30s, and they don't know their talent. They haven't come to appreciate how talented they are, what all they can achieve. And so having built this whole machine and taken a decade to build it, now seeing it mature and at the same time seeing all those people mature and start performing at a really high level and pushing their own boundaries. That's super, super, super. Every single day that drives me. It excites me every day and motivates me to get in there and stay engaged. So that is the first thing that comes to mind.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, as you know, doing the business coaching that we do, seeing that with business owners and as they start to unlock the potential that they have and that transformational process, you know, we talk about that a lot. Like there's information and then there's inspiration and then there's transformation, and that transformation's hard because it's like you might know what you need to do and you might want to even do it, but doing it day in, day out and getting that change that's like the transformation, you know, of now I'm really a professional in this area and I really am breaking through these barriers or getting really excellent with sales or operations or whatever it is that your area is. I can see how that would be really exciting for someone in your position. So that's really cool. I think we might be ready for a fire round.
Let's do it.
All right, Brady, what's your favorite movie?
It's hard to say one. I would say the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe. I found it really, really fun. And so I really enjoyed all the Marvel movies as they were coming out. They kind of fallen off a cliff recently, but during their prime, I would say that was just great watching.
Can I confess something? I've seen, I think, 3.
Really?
So I knew way back in the day, whenever I fell off the wagon and didn't watch them, that I was going to wait until my kids were old enough. So this, like 2 months ago, we started watching them. So I'm going to experience all of them over the next, I don't know, year or 2.
I'm jealous. That sounds awesome.
Yeah.
I can't wait for, we're not quite with my younger one. We're not quite there yet, but that will be a fun day.
They've aged well. There's those movies that don't age well. These have aged very well. They're still super watchable, even 10, 15 years, however many years it's been since they've come out. They're great.
Yeah. I mean, the only ones we've seen so far are Captain America and we started Iron Man and then we decided our youngest wasn't old enough for it. But anyway, we are enjoying it. So, all right.
Aside from the Bible, what's your favorite book?
The most recommended, aside from the Bible, the book I've recommended to the most people is Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand, which is, it's going to come as a shocker because her worldview is totally different than mine. She's atheistic. She was feminist and but I studied economics a lot in college, and some of her ideas, economics related ideas, I just think are unbelievably applicable in today's environment.
I've never read that one.
Nope,
oh my gosh!
I've
read it 3 times, so I've actually read it enough for all 3 of us.
Okay, all right,
okay.
You got to put it on your reading list. It's 1,000 pages, so you better put your big boy pants on because it's.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
I feel like I've seen it. It's a good paperweight.
It's great.
Okay.
All right, this is the hard one. What's one piece of advice that's common in your industry that you don't necessarily agree with?
A piece of advice common in the industry that I don't agree with. Never accept no. Like the salespeople say, never accept no. There's a time when no is just when somebody says no and you just assess the situation and you're like, okay, yeah, that's the right answer for them.
Yeah.
It's not good for them. It's not good for me to push through their no. I just need to take that and just go forward because it's best for everybody. And I need to find somebody whose yes aligns with my direction as opposed to forcing that person's no to become a yes. Because then if it's not good alignment, then it could be bad for both of us.
Yeah. Sometimes the worst business relationships are the ones that, you're trying to force something that's really not going to work out well. So that's a great answer. I like that.
That's hard. All right. How can people get in touch with you? How can people do business with you? Where do we send them?
Our website's probably great for that. It's got all of my contact information. So wheelhousetexas.com. And it's got all of my people as well, because I may not be the primary point of contact for what somebody needs, but wheelhousetexas.com, they can find out who is the contact in our company who can help them with whatever they need. And they can reach out to me. My cell phone number's on there. They can look on there, find me. And if they want to call, then I'm available.
Wheelhousetexas.com.
Texas spelled out. Wheelhouse, Texas, like it's in our wheelhouse. Wheelhousetexas.com.
I love it. I love it, man. Thank you so much. There was plenty of great nuggets in there, and I love your story.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you.